Hey, good to have you back. Pull up whatever you're drinking, because this one's going to take a minute, and it's not the kind of story you can get in a headline. There's a particular kind of lie that isn't really a lie. It's the thing a man says when he's already lost the argument, but hasn't lost the room yet. You've heard it from a coworker explaining why the project is basically done, or a friend insisting the relationship is actually going great 3 weeks before it very publicly isn't. The words are technically defensible. The tone is doing all the work. And if you've spent any time around someone like that, you learn to stop listening to what they're saying and start watching what they're doing with their hands. I mention this because on August 6th, with reporters asking pointed questions about a depleted American arsenal, the President of the United States said the country has, quote, massive amounts of munitions to continue the war with Iran, which would be reassuring, except that statement arrived less than a week after his own officials were privately telling reporters that reports of the Pentagon's dwindling munitions stockpile make the president look weak at the negotiating table. Now, you can believe the stockpile is massive, or you can believe the people managing the stockpile are worried about it. What you cannot do, and I mean this with real affection, is believe both at once. Wikipedia. Wikipedia. So, let's actually walk through this, because the war in Iran has now been running since February. It is still not over, and depending on who in the administration you happen to catch on a given afternoon, America is either winning decisively or two Truth Social posts away from admitting it's stuck. It started with a name that sounds like it was generated by a committee trying to sell action figures. Operation Epic Fury, launched at the end of February. Joint strikes with Israel against Iranian military, government, and infrastructure targets. The stated goal, in the calmer language that came later, was denuclearization. Strip Iran of the capacity to build a weapon, force a deal, move on. Simple, the president said. His actual word was not very complex. I gently note that most conflicts nobody has managed to end in 5 months are, definitionally, somewhat complex. But I understand the appeal of saying otherwise on camera. What's happened since is a pattern so consistent you could set a calendar by it. Threat, deadline, cancellation, repeat. In May, Iran was told the clock was ticking, and there would be nothing left of them if they didn't move fast. Then the strikes were held off at the request of the Gulf states. In June, the military was going to hit Iran, quote, very hard that night. Hours later, canceled, because a deal was apparently close. In August, locked and loaded, levels of force not seen since World War II, and then canceled again, pending a rapid deal because of progress in talks. If you're keeping score, that's not a strategy with an occasional adjustment. That's a man opening the same door over and over, expecting a different room behind it. CNN. Here's what makes this genuinely dangerous rather than just repetitive. Every one of those cancellations gets sold domestically as restraint, as the deal maker doing what the generals couldn't. But restraint that's announced this loudly, this often, stops reading as strength to the other side of the table. It starts reading as a tell. And Iran appears to have picked up on that tell months ago. Just 2 days after the president called their leadership, and I'm going to use his actual phrase here because it's the most Trump sentence in this entire war, unbelievably duplicitous. Tehran was back at the table with Oman discussing a framework for the Strait of Hormuz, while simultaneously and rather pointedly denying it was talking to Washington at all. That's not confusion. That's a government that has figured out it can negotiate through a third party, deny the negotiation exists, and let the American president do the work of making himself look impatient on social media. And the strait itself is the whole ballgame, because roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through it. And since June, Iran has required vessels to use its own designated route through its own territorial waters, which is a nice way of saying it controls the door. The proposed fix, the framework everyone keeps almost agreeing to, would let Iran hold one lane and Oman supervise the other. As of this week, a senior Gulf official put the odds of that actually closing at 50-50, which means after 5 months of war, American strikes, and a small library of presidential deadlines, the best-case scenario on the table is Iran retaining meaningful control over a choke point. It didn't fully control before any of this started. I'm not sure what the win condition was supposed to be here, but I'm fairly confident this isn't it. Meanwhile, the war has stopped behaving like it's contained. Kuwait reported Iranian drone activity. Saudi Arabia is bracing for coordinated attacks from Iraqi militias working alongside Houthi forces. And the Houthis themselves have already claimed a strike on a Saudi tanker. The State Department, not exactly known for dramatics, told American citizens across the region they should consider leaving now. When your own government is quietly encouraging its people to get out of an area while your president is telling cameras the strait will reopen soon, or there'll be consequences, those two signals are not pointing in the same direction, and one of them is more honest than the other. Now, the part of this that should actually worry Americans watching from their living rooms and not from a Gulf port has almost nothing to do with geopolitics and everything to do with arithmetic. War is expensive, and this one is being paid for in ways that show up on a receipt, not a briefing slide. Diesel and gasoline prices have climbed as shipping risk through Hormuz gets priced in. Farmers, who were already absorbing the cost of a trade war nobody declared a winner in, watched the administration send billions in aid to Argentina's economy, while American soybean growers sat underwater. And I don't think you need an agriculture degree to understand why a farmer in Iowa might describe that particular allocation of federal money using the word betrayal. Farm foreclosures in some states are now running at levels that put them at the very top of the national list, which is not the kind of ranking anyone campaigns on. And then there's the man whose actual job is to explain the economy to the country, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who told reporters this month he was tired of hearing about the so-called K-shaped economy, the idea that wealth is diverging sharply, prosperity for some, stagnation for everyone else, and declared, with what I can only describe as confidence untethered from data, that it's simply over. It is worth mentioning, gently, that there are currently something like 74,000 American households worth $100 million or more in a country of roughly 350 million people, and that Bessent himself sits comfortably inside that number. Meanwhile, a woman in Oklahoma City was profiled this summer, keeping her savings account open with a single penny, because that's the minimum balance, selling blood plasma twice a week to get by. I don't know how you look at both of those facts and conclude the divergence is closed. But I suppose if you're standing at the top of the K, the bottom does become a little theoretical. This is where the war and the wallet actually connect. And it's worth saying plainly because the administration would very much prefer you didn't draw the line yourself. Wars cost money, and they cost stockpile, and stockpile has to be replaced, and replacement gets paid for by the same government currently telling farmers there isn't more room in the budget for them. The munitions story that the Washington Post broke, a tense confrontation at Camp David where the president reportedly pressed his own defense secretary over the state of American weapons reserves, and the defense secretary, by several accounts, responded by pointing the blame downward rather than up. That's not just palace gossip. That's the sound of an administration discovering, in real time, on-camera adjacent terms, that 5 months of open-ended conflict has a bill attached, and nobody particularly wants to be the one holding it when the invoice arrives. Which brings us, of course, to the polling, because polling is just the electorate doing arithmetic of its own. Presidential approval sitting in the mid-30s, historically low for this point in a term, and the more interesting detail buried under that headline number. It isn't Democrats abandoning him, because Democrats were never going to be there. It's his own coalition. Support among Republicans and Republican-leaning independents has fallen by double digits since the start of the year. And when you actually go talk to those voters, in Ohio, in the diners and the driveways, the complaints aren't abstract. Gas is up. Groceries are up. Nobody can point to a single tangible benefit this war has produced for their own life, and more than a few of them will tell you, without much hesitation, that they're not fans anymore. That's not a focus group. That's the coalition that put him there, quietly doing the math on what they got in return. So, where does that leave us, 5 months and one increasingly expensive war later? The strait is still contested. The stockpile is either fine or not fine, depending on which official you happen to catch that day. The farmers are foreclosing, the gas prices are climbing, and the man in charge of explaining all of it keeps reaching for the word imminent, a word he has now used to describe this deal so many times that it's started to function less as a prediction and more as a kind of verbal tick, the political equivalent of saying, "You'll call them back." Iran, for its part, appears to have concluded that American urgency is not the same thing as American leverage, and every canceled strike, every renewed deadline, every soon that turns into another soon, gives them less reason to think otherwise. I don't know how this ends. Nobody watching honestly does, including, I suspect, the people inside the administration currently blaming each other for the ammunition count. But I'll say this much. A war that was supposed to be quick and cheap has now run long enough to show up in farm foreclosure numbers and grocery receipts in Ohio, which means it's no longer really a story about Iran at all. It's a story about what happens when a country goes looking for an easy win and finds out, the expensive way, that those don't really exist. I'm Marcus Fenn. This is Borderlines. If today's story sounds a little different from how you've heard it told elsewhere, that's rather the point. Subscribe, and I'll see you at the next one.